Have you ever seen something so perfectly designed to kill that it made you question whether nature itself had gone mad? The alien students hadn't. Not until the humans started talking about sharks. The lecture hall aboard the stellar Concord Academy shimmered with soft blue light, a chamber of polished glass and floating holograms orbiting a distant star. It was a place where species from 100 worlds gathered to learn about primitive biospheres, worlds still ruled by nature, chaos, and evolution. Earth was one of those, the death world. Humans were peculiar, small, fragile, short-lived, soft skin, exposed organs. The other species whispered that it was a miracle they'd survived at all. So when Cadet Lura, a feathery avian from the serene world of Halcyon IV, leaned over her console and chirped, "Professor, is it true that humans live among predators?" The room filled with quiet laughter. Predators. The word was ancient, something most civilized species hadn't seen in eons. Professor Kethal, a being of shifting colors and calm intellect, tilted his translucent head toward the lone human sitting near the back. "Perhaps," he said, voice like a whispering wind, "our Deathworld exchange student can clarify." All eyes turned to him. Elias Kane, Earthborn, muscular though not large, calm though his eyes carried a glint the others couldn't name, something feral, something patient. He stood slowly, unhurried, as if the air itself were thick with gravity. He smiled faintly. "You want to know about predators?" A low murmur rolled through the class. "Please," the professor said, curiosity flickering in his bioluminescent veins. "Describe one. Something typical, perhaps. A terrestrial example." Elias tilted his head. Typical. He seemed to think for a moment, as if weighing what kind of truth the room was ready to hear. "All right. Let's start simple. Let's talk about sharks." The word hung in the air like a blade. A few alien students blinked in confusion. One of the insectoids clicked its mandibles. "Shark," it repeated, tasting the unfamiliar sound. Elias tapped his console, projecting a blue hologram into the air, a sleek shape, torpedo-like, moving through dark water. The aliens leaned forward. The creature had no wings, no heat signature, no visible armor, just flesh and teeth, rows of them. "This," Elias said, "is a shark. It's not the biggest predator on Earth, not the fastest, but it's ancient. It's been perfect for about 400 million years. It doesn't need to evolve anymore." The hologram moved, circling, gliding, graceful, silent. A reptilian student blinked its vertical eyes. "It swims? In a liquid medium?" "Yeah," Elias said, "in salt water. You breathe that, you die. But it doesn't. It thrives there. It senses movement through pressure waves, blood through parts per million. It can detect a wounded creature from miles away." The avian cadet raised a trembling wing. "But it hunts. Only when hungry?" Elias chuckled. "No, sharks don't get angry. They don't hate. They just move. They hunt because that's what they are. They don't decide to kill. You enter their world, and they simply remind you that it's theirs." A soft rustle went through the hall. Some shifted uncomfortably. The professor adjusted the hologram, zooming in on the creature's eyes, black, depthless. "No emotion?" "None," Elias said. "Just instinct, perfect, efficient instinct." "And you?" Cathal asked, voice quieter now. "You coexist with these?" Elias's lips curved into something not quite a smile. "We swim with them." Gasps. A few alien students recoiled, feathers puffing, scales shivering. The insectoid cadet hissed, "Impossible! Your species lacks armor, claws, venom. Why would you risk—" "Because we can," Elias interrupted softly. "Because we're curious. Because we had to." The professor tilted his head. "Had to?" Elias took a slow breath, eyes distant. "You think of humans as weak because we bleed easy. Because we break bones. But you don't understand. On Earth, everything tries to kill us. The weather, the terrain, the plants, the animals, even the water if you breathe it wrong. You learn to fight back or you die. The hologram changed again. Footage now. Stormy seas, dark silhouettes slicing through waves, a diver descending into the abyss. The shark isn't our enemy, Elias continued. It's our mirror. It taught us something no civilization ever could. Survival doesn't need mercy. The room was silent now. Even the hum of the life support systems felt muted, swallowed by the tension. Kethal finally spoke. So, this creature, it represents your world's temperament? Elias looked up at the swirling hologram. No, he said softly. It represents what happens when evolution stops caring about comfort. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Lura, the avian, fluttered nervously. But humans, you hunt them. Sometimes, Elias said. Mostly we study them, film them. We admire their power. We respect it. Respect? Yeah, he smiled faintly. Because we recognize it. We came from the same place. Kethal's colors dimmed, his voice dropping lower. You mean, your species is related? Elias shook his head. No, I mean we understand them. A shark doesn't feel fear the way you do, but it knows what pain is. It knows hunger. It knows struggle. And so do we. We built cities not because Earth was kind to us, but because it wasn't. A projection flickered across the walls. Lightning storms, volcanoes, deserts, blizzards. The Earth in all its violent beauty. Kethal whispered, Your homeworld is hostile. Elias laughed once, quiet and genuine. That's one word for it. The scientists call it a death world. We just call it home. The aliens watched, spellbound, as the hologram shifted again, showing early humans wielding spears, fire flickering in their eyes, surrounding a mammoth 10 times their size. Then modern humans, divers descending into pitch-black trenches, swimming beside the shadows of giants. The shark appeared once more, circling the human figure like a ghost of evolution itself. Kethal's voice trembled with fascination. And yet, you survived. You thrived. Elias nodded slowly. Because we stopped waiting for safety. We learned to move through danger, to live with it, to look a predator in the eye and not run. Silence again. Heavy, unsettling. The professor finally asked, Tell me, Cadet Kane, if the shark is not your enemy, what is? Elias looked up at the sea of alien faces, some curious, some horrified, all listening. He held their gaze for a long moment before answering. Our enemy, he said quietly, is forgetting that we come from that same ocean. The room darkened as the hologram dimmed. For a moment, the students could almost feel the cold weight of the abyss pressing around them, the unseen motion of something vast and ancient gliding just out of sight. Laura whispered, almost to herself, Do they still hunt? Elias turned to her, eyes sharp but calm. They never stopped. They're out there right now. You could drain the oceans and you'd still feel them, waiting. A shiver rippled through the group. Professor Kethal deactivated the hologram, the light vanishing with a soft hiss. The silence that followed felt alive, breathing. Finally, Kethal said, Perhaps, next week, Cadet Kane, you might tell us more about these creatures. Elias inclined his head. Sure, I can tell you about others too. If you think sharks are bad, wait until I explain what lives on land. A nervous laugh rippled through the room, but it didn't reach their eyes. The human smiled, slow, knowing, patient. Outside the viewport, the distant blue world of Earth hung in the darkness, small and unassuming. To most of the galaxy, it looked peaceful, quiet. But the aliens in that classroom knew better now. They had seen the glint behind human eyes, the reflection of the abyss staring back. And deep beneath the oceans of that fragile blue world, something ancient stirred, its shadow slicing through the water with silent grace, teeth glinting in the dark. The shark didn't know it was being discussed across the stars. It didn't need to. It was eternal, perfect. And as the alien students left the room, none of them spoke. But every one of them thought the same silent, shivering thought. If that is just one creature from their world, what else lives there? The question lingered, echoing down the metallic halls of the academy, growing louder the more they tried not to think about it. And somewhere in the dark between stars, a shark kept swimming. The next day, the lecture hall felt different. The soft blue light seemed colder somehow, the air heavier. The alien students filed in quietly, their usual chatter replaced by uneasy glances toward the back row, toward the human. Elias Kane sat as before, calm, focused, the faintest shadow of a smile tracing his lips. But now there was a certain distance in his eyes, as if part of him wasn't really there. Like his mind was drifting somewhere deep beneath the surface of an unseen sea. Professor Kethal floated into the room with his usual composure, though even his translucent form shimmered with a strange tension. His voice came softer than usual. Yesterday's discussion has sparked quite an interest among your peers, Cadet Kane. Many of us were unprepared for the ferocity of your world. Elias looked up. Ferocity, he repeated thoughtfully. That's one word for it. Lura the avian fluttered her wings nervously. You said there are others, worse than sharks? Elias hesitated, then stood. Yeah, you could say that. Sharks rule the sea, but on land, well, that's where things really get complicated. The professor dimmed the lights, and the holographic projector hummed to life again. Darkness filled the room. Then, a roar, deep and primal, rolled through the speakers, shaking the glass walls. The image flickered into view, a jungle dense with mist and heat. Leaves glistened with moisture. Something moved in the shadows, massive, deliberate, unseen. This, Elias said quietly, is the African savanna, home to lions. The shape emerged, a creature of muscle and motion, golden eyes gleaming beneath the sun. It walked with a confidence that made even the hologram feel alive, dangerous. Social predators, Elias continued. They hunt together, communicate, plan. Their bite can crush bone, their claws can open a ribcage. Lura whispered, they sound intelligent. They are, Elias said. But they don't need technology. Their intelligence is in the hunt, in patience, coordination. They've perfected teamwork long before we did. Kethel's colors dimmed again. And your species lived among these? Elias nodded. We didn't have armor, no venom, just fire, stone, and fear. For thousands of years that was our world. Night after night, waiting in the dark, listening for the sound of something breathing too close. The hologram shifted. Early humans clustered around a flickering fire, their shadows long and trembling. Beyond the flames, the eyes of lions glowed like dying stars. You learned to fight them? One of the reptilian cadets asked. Elias looked at him. We learned to become them. A ripple passed through the room. The hologram changed again, human silhouettes moving through tall grass, silent and precise, eyes locked forward, spears raised, hearts steady. The lions roared and the humans roared back. We didn't just survive, Elias said. We adapted. We studied every predator on our planet, learned their patterns, their instincts. We stole what worked. The patience of a spider, the pack tactics of wolves, the endurance of wild dogs. We became predators of predators. Kethal's voice was barely a whisper now. You imitated them? We learned from them, Elias corrected. We evolved beside them. And when we couldn't match their strength, we built tools. When tools weren't enough, we built strategies. When those failed, we learned fear, controlled it, turned it into something useful. The professor leaned forward. And the shark? Where does it fit in this hierarchy? Elias's expression darkened slightly. The shark never needed to change. It's a reminder that there are things in nature so perfect, they're eternal. We might have learned from the land, but the ocean, it still owns us. Silence. Only the hum of the ship filled the space between words. Then a voice broke it. Small, uncertain. Is that why they call Earth a death world? Elias looked around the room. They call it that because everything fights to exist. The planet burns, freezes, floods, cracks, and life just keeps going. We evolved under constant threat. Every living thing there did. So when you meet a human, you're meeting something that's been forged by 4 billion years of desperation. The class fell still, absorbing that. Then, quietly, Kethel asked, "And yet, you've built peace. You travel the stars. You've tamed your world." Elias' eyes flicked toward him. "No one tames Earth, Professor. We just learn to pretend." For a moment, no one breathed. The hologram flickered again, showing the modern world, cities gleaming under clouds, oceans restless, forests stretching endlessly. Yet beneath the beauty there was still motion, life, danger. "You build walls," Cathal said softly. "Machines, weapons. You reach outward. And still, it's never enough, is it?" Elias looked away, his jaw tightening. Because survival never stops feeling like hunger. The professor studied him, the room heavy with unspoken realization. "And you carry that hunger into space." Elias didn't deny it. From the back of the room, the insectoid cadet's voice trembled. "If your kind learned from predators, what happens when you find a new one?" Elias smiled faintly, but it wasn't warm. "We study it. And then we decide if we can live with it, or if it's in the way." The words landed like a cold wind through the room. Even Kethal seemed unsettled, his luminous veins pulsing faster. Outside the viewport, the vast curve of the galaxy shimmered, a spiral of light and darkness, infinite and silent. Laura finally whispered, "Are there still wars on Earth?" Elias exhaled slowly. "Fewer now, but the instinct doesn't vanish. We just find new ways to fight. Competition, innovation, exploration. You could say it's still the same thing, we just change the battlefield." He paused, looking out the window. "But sometimes I wonder if the ocean still remembers us, if the sharks still circle, waiting for the day we forget how to swim." The line lingered like fog. The students sat in a kind of reverent dread, as if they were no longer studying biology but something deeper, something about themselves. Kethal drifted forward, his voice calm again. "Perhaps we might explore this further. You've spoken of predators and survival, but what of compassion, cooperation? Surely humanity learned that too." Elias looked back at him, the corner of his mouth lifting. "We did. But compassion came later. It was something we earned after we stopped running, when we had time to look at each other and realize we were safer together." He gestured toward the hologram again, now showing human hands building, tending, creating. Firelight replaced by city lights, spears replaced by satellites. "Every time we mastered a danger, we built something beautiful over its grave," he said. "But we never forgot what it took to get there. That's the difference. We remember the teeth." The professor's glow softened. "You mean fear became foundation?" "Exactly," Elias said. "We're not fearless, Professor. We're just used to walking with it." The room fell quiet again. The alien students exchanged glances, some in awe, others in unease. And then, without warning, the ship's lights flickered. A low, distant rumble echoed through the halls. The walls trembled, faint but unmistakable. Kethal straightened instantly, his tones shifting. That should not happen. Elias's head tilted. What was that? The professor interfaced with the console, his glow pulsing rapidly. A system fluctuation, minor. He hesitated, his voice tightening. Originating from the lower biosphere lab. A murmur swept through the students. The lab? Elias asked. Yes, Kethal said. Where we maintain specimens from developing worlds for xenobiological study. Elias's eyes narrowed. Specimens from Earth? Kethal hesitated again, then nodded. The human's posture changed subtly. Alert, focused. What kind of specimens? Marine life, Kethal replied carefully. Small organisms, simple life forms. But his tone betrayed something else. Elias stepped closer. What kind? Before Kethal could answer, the lights flickered again, this time harder. A sharp metallic groan reverberated through the structure. Several students gasped. Kethal's bioluminescence brightened, a sign of distress. Containment breach, he said sharply. Section 12. Elias moved toward the door. Show me. Cadet, that is not protocol. Show me. The firmness in his voice froze the room. Kethal hesitated, then brought up the feed. The projection shimmered into life. A dim corridor filled with vapor, sparks, a shattered tank. The floor glistened with seawater shimmering under the emergency lights. Something moved. Slow, sinister, just beyond the camera's focus. Kethal's voice was tight now. Impossible. It was a controlled environment. What was in that tank? Elias asked quietly. Kethal's colors dimmed. A Carcharodon Carcharias. The words hit like a gunshot. Lura blinked, confused. What? Elias answered for him, voice almost a whisper. A great white shark. The room erupted in murmurs. The insectoid hissed. You brought that aboard this vessel. It was sedated, Kethal said quickly. Heavily monitored. It should not. The feed jolted. The camera fell, static. Then, a glimpse of something massive moving through the water flooding the corridor. Elias stared at the projection, his jaw clenched. You thought you could contain the ocean, he said quietly. You can't. Kethal turned to him. We underestimated its metabolism, its neurological resilience. It should not have awakened. Elias stepped toward the screen, watching the shadow move. That's the thing about sharks, Professor. They don't care what should happen. The room was silent, except for the hum of the failing lights. Kethal tried to sound calm. Security will handle it. Elias didn't look away. Do they even understand what they're dealing with? The professor hesitated. Elias' voice dropped lower, almost reverent. It's 400 million years of hunger, Professor. You can't reason with that. On the flickering feed, the creature's shadow glided closer to the camera, massive, graceful, unstoppable. Then the feed cut to black. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Kethal whispered, How do we stop it? Elias turned toward him slowly, his eyes reflecting the cold blue light. You don't, he said. You survive it. Outside, through the viewport, the stars drifted by, calm, endless, oblivious. Inside, somewhere in the bowels of the ship, a predator from a forgotten world began to swim again. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was about to learn what it truly meant to bring a piece of the Deathworld aboard. The alarms came first, low, pulsing tones that rippled through the metal corridors like a heartbeat gone wrong. The ship's calm, ambient hum had turned into something jagged, alive with panic. Emergency lights bathed the halls in deep crimson, flickering across smooth glass and polished alloy. In that color, everything seemed raw, organic, almost bleeding. Professor Kethel moved swiftly, his form glowing erratically. His voice, usually serene, had hardened. Evacuate non-essential sections. Seal all aquatic containment units immediately. The alien students hesitated, frozen between fear and disbelief. None of them had ever seen their instructor like this, no longer composed, no longer curious. Now he looked afraid. Elias Kane was already gone from the classroom. He moved through the corridors with purpose, boots echoing against the deck. The sirens didn't faze him. If anything, they sharpened his focus. He'd grown up with chaos. Sirens meant the world was still alive. Silence was what you feared. The ship wasn't built for chaos, though. It was built for order, for scientists, explorers, diplomats, not for something born of an ancient ocean where life still measured time in blood. When he reached Section 12, the doors were sealed. 2 security officers, scaled, 6-limbed, stood at the console, their claws tapping rapidly over holographic commands. "Status?" Elias demanded. The taller one glanced up. "Containment breach. We've sealed all bulkheads, but fluid displacement keeps climbing. There's movement in the ducts. Fast, irregular." Elias frowned. "You're saying it's moving through the water systems?" The officer's throat plates fluttered. "Impossible. The ducts are too small." Elias's eyes stayed on the readout. "Nothing's impossible when it's hungry." The officer gave him a sharp look. "It's a fish." Elias smiled faintly, but his voice was grave. "No, it's an idea that learned to swim." Before the officer could reply, the door shuddered with a deep, resonant boom. The metal dented inward, water spraying through the seams in sharp jets. The lights flickered, casting the corridor in stuttering flashes of red and white. Then silence. Cathal's voice came over the intercom. "Cadet Kane, step away from that section immediately." Elias didn't move, his eyes fixed on the dented door. "Professor," he said slowly, "did you ever wonder why sharks don't stop moving?" Static crackled. "This is not the time for... They have to keep swimming," Elias said, voice low, "because if they stop, they die. Their bodies are built that way. They never rest." As if on cue, another boom. The metal bent further. Something behind it moved, slowly, deliberately. Cathal's voice returned, sharper now. "Security drones are en route. Step back." Elias took a breath, backing away, but not far. His eyes were locked on the seam of the door. Then came the sound. Not loud, but distinct, a low scrape, like steel dragged across bone. The kind of sound that wakes something primal inside you, older than reason. Elias whispered, "It's learning the walls." The officer beside him hissed, "That's absurd. It's an aquatic." The door exploded inward, a rush of black water flooding the corridor. The force slammed Elias against the opposite wall, cold and violent. For a heartbeat, the world was only chaos. Red light, screaming alarms, the roar of released pressure. And in that chaos, a shape, a shadow. It wasn't clear at first, just a blur of motion beneath the water, sleek and enormous. But then the light caught it, just enough to reveal a curve of grey muscle, a fin slicing through suspended droplets. Teeth glinted once, then vanished again. The officer fired into the water, plasma rounds hissing, the bolts scattered, absorbed by the liquid. The shark didn't even flinch. Elias was already moving, pulling the officer backward, dragging him toward the access ladder. "Get to higher decks." "But go." The officer obeyed, scrambling upward as the corridor filled. Elias followed, gripping the slick rungs. Below him the water churned. For a moment, just before the hatch sealed, he thought he saw it look up. Not as a creature looks at prey, but as something ancient looks at something familiar. He slammed the hatch closed and sealed it. The sirens changed pitch, now a steady rising tone that meant the problem was no longer localized. The ocean was spreading. He climbed, soaked and breathing hard, until he reached the next level. Kethal was waiting there, flanked by 2 more officers and a trio of trembling students. Lura among them. Her feathers were plastered to her body, eyes wide and gleaming. "What did you see?" Kethal asked. Elias met his gaze. "It's alive. It's adapting. It's not panicked. It's exploring." "Exploring," Elias nodded. "Testing the environment. That's what sharks do. They don't attack randomly. They investigate through force. They taste the world with their teeth." The room went silent. Lura's voice broke softly through the tension. "But it can't survive outside water." Elias looked at her. "Not for long, but it doesn't need long." The professor turned to the others. "We can isolate that section, vent it into space." Elias shook his head. "Not yet." Kethal spun toward him, disbelief flashing through his translucent skin. "Not yet? It's a predator." "It's more than that," Elias said. "You don't understand. It shouldn't be this strong, not after stasis. How did you grow it?" The question froze Kethal mid-motion. Elias took a step closer. "You said it was a simple specimen, but it broke reinforced alloy and adapted to zero-gravity pressure. That's not natural." The professor hesitated. "We may have made enhancements." Lura gasped. "Enhancements?" "Genetic stabilization," Kethal said quickly. "Minor augmentations to tolerate environmental variation. It was for research." Elias's eyes narrowed. "You made a shark that doesn't need an ocean." Kethal didn't answer. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Elias said, "Then you've created something that doesn't belong anywhere. It's not just hungry, it's confused. It's trying to find equilibrium." The professor turned toward the viewport, where the distant stars shimmered. "We underestimated it." Elias sighed. "Everyone does." Then came another rumble, distant, deeper this time. The deck trembled beneath their feet. Kethal's tone changed. "It's moving toward the power conduits." Elias blinked. "Toward the current?" Kethal nodded. "Yes. Why?" Elias's expression hardened. "It's drawn to it. Electric signals mimic distress. It thinks the ship is alive." The realization rippled through them like static. Kethal activated his communicator. "Engineering. Shut down main conduits immediately." But before the command could transmit, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the corridor, punctuated only by the red emergency glow. The hum of the engines faltered, then died. In that instant, the silence was total, so complete it felt wrong. And then, something brushed the outer hull, a deep metallic thud, like a hand on the skin of the ship. Once, twice, then a long scrape that traveled along the frame, echoing through every wall. Lura whispered, "It's outside." Elias shook his head. "No, it's inside the coolant channels." The professor turned sharply. "Those run through the entire vessel." "Yeah," Elias said quietly. "Now the whole ship is an ocean." For a long moment, no one moved. The sound came again, a deep, resonant vibration that made the floor tremble. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, almost like breathing. Lura clutched her translator device to her chest. How can something from one world terrify 100 others? Elias didn't answer. His gaze was fixed somewhere far away, beyond the walls. "Because fear isn't bound by biology," he said softly. "It's memory. The shark reminds us of something we all lost when we left the wild." Kethal's colors flickered dimly. "And what is that?" Elias turned to him. "The knowledge that we were never meant to feel safe." Outside, the stars began to blur as the ship's stabilizers flickered. The engines coughed to life again, half-powered, the vibration of metal on metal echoing through the decks. Kethal steadied himself, his tone quickening. "We'll need to flush the entire lower compartment into space. There's no other option." Elias hesitated. You sure it's still down there? What do you mean? Elias looked at him. Sharks follow current. If it's in the cooling channels, it's already moving upward, toward the heat, toward motion. Keithal's gaze darted toward the ceiling where the air vents pulsed faintly. The reactor core. Elias nodded. Exactly. The professor's form dimmed, flickering faster. Then it's headed for the heart of the ship. Elias started walking. Then we better get there first. They moved fast through the corridors, the emergency lights strobing around them. The students trailed close, fear thick in the air. With each turn, the sound of metal groaning seemed to grow louder. At the reactor access corridor, they found the first sign. Water. Just a thin film at first, shimmering under the red light. Then, as they moved closer, droplets running down the walls. A smell, too. Salt and ozone. Elias stopped, scanning the reflection on the floor. It's been here. How do you know? Lura asked. He pointed to faint scratches along the wall. 3 long parallel lines, too clean, too deliberate. The ocean leaves signatures, he said. So do the things in it. The professor's voice was a low tremor. If it reaches the reactor. It won't, Elias said. But his tone didn't sound certain. They reached the final hatch. Beyond it was the ship's main reactor chamber, massive, glowing, alive with energy. The hum was stronger here, almost a pulse. The heat fogged the air, and in that haze, the metal floor looked like the surface of the sea. Keithal keyed in the code. The door slid open with a hiss. Steam poured out. At first, the room looked empty. The core loomed at the center, a towering cylinder of energy, light bending around it. The chamber walls were streaked with condensation. Then Elias saw it. A shape gliding through the mist, faint but unmistakable. It moved with impossible grace, circling the core slowly as if orbiting a new kind of sun. It's drawn to the energy, Elias whispered. It thinks it's home. Lura trembled beside him. What do we do? Elias didn't answer immediately. He watched the creature move, each turn deliberate, searching. Then softly, he said, It's adapting faster than I thought. It shouldn't even survive this atmosphere. Keithal's glow flared. You sound almost fascinated. Elias looked at him. I am, because this isn't just a shark anymore. It's evolution with no leash. The creature turned again, closer this time. Its eyes, black, depthless, met his. For the first time, Elias felt something he hadn't expected. Recognition. Then, without warning, the light surged. The reactor pulsed. The shark accelerated. Keithal shouted, It's feeding on the energy! Elias lunged toward the control panel. Shut it down. I can't. It's locking the sequence. The chamber roared. The air rippled like water. The lights flickered wildly as the creature moved faster, its outline blurring. Energy arced across its skin in blue veins, pulsing with every movement. And then just before the overload threshold, Elias stopped. He stared through the shimmering light, realization dawning on his face. It's not feeding, he whispered. It's changing. The professor turned toward him. Changing? Elias met his gaze, voice barely audible over the chaos. It's not adapting to us. It's evolving past us. And in the next instant, the reactor flared white. For a heartbeat, the universe itself seemed to start breathing. Light swallowed everything. For a moment, there was no up or down, no sound. Only a blinding white so total it felt like drowning in the heart of a sun. Then, slowly, color began to return. Blues, silvers, reds. The world reassembling itself in trembling fragments. Elias opened his eyes to chaos. The reactor chamber was half ruined, the air thick with smoke and static. The great core still burned at the center, but its light was unstable, flickering like the breath of something dying. Fragments of metal floated in the low gravity, twisting lazily through the air. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, his mind muffled by the echo of what had just happened. The sound returned next, low and distant at first, then sharper. The alarms were gone. Only the hum of the ship remained, weak and uneven, as if the vessel itself were gasping for air. He pushed himself up. The deck beneath him was scorched, still warm. Across the chamber, Kethel lay motionless, his translucent form dim, light pulsing faintly inside him like a candle struggling to survive. Elias staggered toward him, every movement an effort. "Kethal," he rasped, kneeling. "Talk to me." The alien's glow fluttered weakly. "Still. Functioning," he murmured. His voice had lost its harmonic calm. Now it trembled, human-like in its exhaustion. "The core is destabilizing, but we contained the surge." Elias turned his gaze toward the center of the chamber. "No," he whispered. "We didn't." Through the haze, he could still see the shape, faint, drifting near the core as if suspended in a dream. The shark, or what had once been a shark. Its body had changed. It was no longer bound by form, its outline rippling, unstable, as though light itself was trying to remember what flesh had been. Its skin shimmered with threads of bioluminescence, thin currents of energy weaving through its muscles like veins of lightning. The creature floated in silence, motionless now, as if listening. Lura's voice broke through the static behind him. "It's beautiful." Elias didn't turn. "No," he said softly. "It's impossible." The others entered slowly, their fear tempered by awe. They stood at the threshold, staring at the thing hovering near the reactor like a ghost of evolution itself. The heat from the core washed over them in slow, rhythmic waves, and with each pulse the creature's body seemed to shimmer brighter. Cathal's voice was faint, but steady. "It has absorbed quantum energy. That should have killed it instantly." Elias looked at him. "It didn't die because it doesn't know how. Death is just another pressure to adapt to." Lura stepped closer, her feathers trembling. "Is it aware?" Elias hesitated. "I don't know, but it's watching." The creature's head turned slightly, following the movement of the group. No sound, no aggression. Just that ancient, unblinking stare, now lit from within by a glow that didn't belong to any natural ocean. Then slowly it began to move. Not swimming exactly, but gliding through the air as if the laws of gravity were only a suggestion. It passed near the reactor's light, and for a moment its body refracted into 1,000 fragments, each one shimmering before rejoining. Kethel rose unsteadily to his feet. If it maintains this energy intake, it could compromise the ship's field integrity. Elias frowned. Meaning, Kethel said grimly. "It will tear this vessel apart, trying to sustain itself." Lura's voice was barely a whisper. "We have to destroy it." Elias looked at her, his face shadowed in the dim light. "You can't destroy something that doesn't belong to time anymore." Kethel's glow dimmed further. "We have to try." The creature turned again, slow, deliberate, and drifted toward them. Every light in the room seemed to bend toward it, drawn by an invisible tide. Its form shimmered more violently now, flickering between states of matter and energy. The air around it buzzed, carrying the faint scent of ozone and salt. Elias could feel it, not with his senses, but somewhere deeper. A pressure, a vibration that resonated inside his bones. He took an involuntary step forward. "It's changing still," he murmured. "Evolving in real time." "Elias," Kethal warned, but it was too late. The creature moved, not attacking but touching the air between them. A faint pulse of light rippled outward. For an instant Elias saw things, flashes of dark oceans, currents flowing through infinite night, stars reflected on water that had never known light. It wasn't violence, it was memory. He staggered back, breath sharp. "What did you see?" Laura asked. He shook his head slowly, voice rough. Not its thoughts, its history, its instinct. It's trying to make sense of what it's become. The creature hovered a few meters away, still watching, its body crackling faintly with blue arcs. Keithal's hands moved across the console, bringing up a containment field. We can't risk it understanding more, he said. If it learns, it adapts. If it adapts, it survives. Elias turned sharply. You don't cage something like this, Professor. Kethal met his gaze, eyes flickering like shifting galaxies. Then what do you propose? To let it consume us? Elias glanced back at the creature. Maybe it's not trying to consume anything. Maybe it's just doing what life always does, searching for balance. The words hung in the air, fragile and defiant. Laura looked between them. Balance? It's destroying the ship. Elias stepped closer to the light. So did we. Once. Every species that reached the stars did. We tore apart our worlds to escape them. Maybe it's just following our example. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of the core and the soft crackle of energy from the creature's body. Then, without warning, the lights surged again. The air temperature dropped sharply. Frost began to form on the metal walls. Kethal's glow spiked. It's pulling thermal energy now. It's adapting to both extremes. The ship groaned, a deep, echoing sound that carried through the hull. Far above, the alarm systems tried to restart, flickering uselessly. Elias turned back toward the corridor. We need to move, now. They ran, Laura, Kethal, and the remaining students, down the winding metal halls that twisted through the ship's heart. Behind them, the faint shimmer of light followed, slow but constant. As they passed through each section, systems flickered and failed. Panels warped, lights dimmed, machinery cracked. The creature wasn't chasing them, it was changing the environment, as if rewriting the ship molecule by molecule to match its own strange equilibrium. Elias could feel it now, the subtle rhythm beneath his feet, like waves against a hull. The entire ship had become a sea, and the creature was its new current. They reached the central lift shaft. Kethal slammed a control panel. We can reach the command deck. Override the systems manually. If we divert the power to the auxiliary cores, we might stabilize. A low tremor cut him off. The deck shifted under their feet. A sound, deep and resonant, filled the air, the same scrape they'd heard before, amplified until the metal itself seemed to cry. Laura gripped the wall, feathers trembling. It's inside the structure. Elias looked upward. It's everywhere. The lift opened with a hiss. They stepped inside, the doors sealing behind them. For a few seconds, they ascended in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts, their own fear. Then Kethal spoke quietly. Do you understand what this means, Cadet Kane? We may have witnessed the first form of post-biological evolution. A creature that bridges the organic and the quantum. Elias didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the numbers rising above the door. Finally, he said, Maybe. Or maybe it's just the oldest lesson in the universe. Life finds a way to keep moving, even when it has to become something else to do it. The lift slowed. The hum grew louder again. The doors opened to the command deck, once bright and orderly, now dark, scattered with fragments of equipment and floating debris. The stars outside the viewport shimmered strangely, as if viewed through water. Laura stepped forward slowly. The field around the ship. It's changing shape. Kethal checked the controls. The reactor's energy signature has merged with the creature's. It's not separate anymore. The shark isn't in the ship. It is the ship. Elias froze. The realization hit like a shock. He looked out at the shifting starlight, his voice barely audible. It's not just evolving, it's spreading. Keithal turned to him. If that's true, we're standing inside a living organism that doesn't know it's alive. The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside, the stars rippled again, distorted, bending as if pulled through liquid space. Elias took a step closer to the viewport. His reflection stared back at him, tired, wet, streaked with soot. For a moment, behind his own face, he thought he saw another shape. A curve of movement. A fin. He blinked, and it was gone. Lura's voice broke softly. Elias, what if it's not confused? What if it's trying to communicate? He didn't answer. Kettle's hands trembled over the controls. If that's true, every second we delay gives it more time to understand us. We can't afford that. Elias turned to him, eyes steady now. Or maybe understanding is the only thing that can stop it. Kettle hesitated. You're suggesting contact. Elias nodded. I've felt its instinct. It's not malice, it's momentum. It needs direction. If we can guide it, show it what balance means, it might stop consuming everything in its path. The professor's colors dimmed, cycling rapidly between disbelief and dread. You can't reason with a storm. Elias looked at him, quiet but certain. Maybe not. But storms don't last forever. The lights flickered again, brighter this time. The hum deepened, vibrating through their bones. The creature, or the ship, or whatever it had become, was waking fully now. The walls shimmered faintly, waves of light rippling across the surface like reflections on water. The sound was changing too, less mechanical, more organic. A slow rhythm, deep and steady like a heartbeat. Elias stepped closer to the center console. Open the external comlink. Kettle's eyes widened. You're going to talk to it? Elias smiled faintly. No, I'm going to listen. The room fell silent. The hum grew louder, then steadied into a pattern that almost resembled breathing. Lura's feathers rose in unease. What if it doesn't stop? Elias didn't look away from the viewport. Then maybe it's never meant to. And in the next moment, the stars outside bent sharply inward, drawn toward the ship as if reality itself had taken a breath. The lights went white again. The hum stopped. For the briefest second, everything was utterly still. And then, somewhere deep within the hull, a single sound began to rise. A pulse. Slow, measured, familiar, not mechanical. Living. Elias turned his head slightly, and realization flickered in his eyes like distant lightning. Whatever had just awoken wasn't just the creature anymore. It was listening back. The sound came first, deep, resonant, alive. It pulsed through the floor, through the air, through bone. A heartbeat that didn't belong to any one creature, but to something vast and uncertain. The ship, or whatever it had become, was alive, and its first breath was thunder. Elias stood at the viewport, watching the stars bend and ripple, as if the universe itself had drawn closer to listen. Every light outside seemed to tremble in sympathy, each flicker syncing with that impossible rhythm inside the hull. The sound was not mechanical. It was not even natural. It was becoming. Behind him, Laura's feathers shivered, scattering motes of soft light. It's aware, she whispered. Kethal stared at the console. No system readings, no gravity, no quantum fields, no energy index. Everything's blank. Not blank, Elias murmured. Reset. Kethal turned sharply. What are you saying? Elias didn't take his eyes from the stars. That it's rewriting the parameters of existence, ours, its own, everything connected to this space. The professor's colors darkened, like storm clouds coiling beneath glass. That's not evolution, that's annihilation. Maybe they're the same thing, Elias said softly. Another pulse shook the air. The metal beneath them rippled like liquid. The walls around the bridge seemed to breathe. Laura stumbled back, clutching at the railing. It's merging. It's merging us. Elias turned. Not merging, learning. And then the light changed. The air turned blue-white, radiant like dawn seen from underwater. Shadows disappeared. Everything was motion, fluid, seamless. Elias felt it before he saw it. Something brushing the edge of his mind, a flicker of emotion not his own. It wasn't thought exactly, but instinct, pure and ancient. A sensation of vastness, hunger, then confusion, curiosity. It was the creature, reaching, not in words but in essence. A contact not through sound or signal, but through resonance, through the shared pulse of everything that lived. Elias staggered slightly, hand on the console. It's trying to understand us, he whispered. It's inside the neural field of the ship. Kethal's glow brightened. Then it's reading you. It's using your mind as the interface. Lura's voice was tight with fear. Can it hurt him? Kethal didn't answer. His gaze flickered toward Elias, but the human's eyes were far away now, fixed on something beyond the bridge, beyond space. He was standing in an ocean, not water, something deeper, a void of light and movement, waves of memory, endless and alive, crashing and reforming with every heartbeat. He could feel it, the creature's consciousness flowing around him like a tide. Fragments of what it had seen, the cold pressure of the abyss, the shimmer of scales in darkness, the pulse of prey fleeing through water. The first birth, the first kill, the endless motion that had defined its existence. And then, silence. The void between stars. The cold loneliness of being without the sea. The creature had never stopped swimming even when there was nowhere left to go. Elias opened his eyes, or thought he did. In the glowing ocean of thought, he saw a shape emerging. The shark, but not flesh, light, pure energy given form. Its eyes burned like twin galaxies. It circled him slowly, movements calm, fluid. There was no malice, only awareness, the terrifying intelligence of something realizing for the first time that it could choose. Elias spoke, or thought he did. You're alive. The creature's form rippled, uncertain. You adapted, he continued, voice trembling with awe. You became more than nature ever intended. The light around the creature pulsed once, a ripple that carried 1,000 emotions, not words but meanings, survival, isolation, confusion. Elias felt tears sting his eyes. You're afraid. The pulse dimmed. He reached out, his hand dissolving into light. So were we. Something shifted in the current. The ocean of energy began to calm. The creature's light dimmed, softening into a slow rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. For the first time, Elias felt it not as a monster, not as a legend or an experiment, but as something alive, searching for place and purpose. A reflection of humanity's own restless need to understand the unknown. But beneath that calm, he sensed something deeper. A pressure. A second pulse. Something vast and dangerous stirring in the background of that connection. He looked up, and the horizon moved. The light twisted, reshaping itself into spirals of energy. Stars collapsed and formed again. And from the center of it all came a new sensation, cold, ancient, patient. It wasn't the shark. It was the void itself. Kethal's voice echoed faintly through the current, distorted. Elias, the core's destabilizing. You have to break contact. But he couldn't move. The creature was showing him more, flashes of something beyond comprehension. The moment of its creation. The first spark when matter touched consciousness. The birth of instinct, the shaping of hunger into purpose. And within it, hidden like a seed, a mirror of humanity's own defiance against extinction. The ship shook violently, the pulse grew louder, faster. Lura screamed something he couldn't hear. Elias's thoughts fractured under the weight of connection. He could feel the edges of himself blurring, dissolving into the rhythm of the creature's consciousness. Then, clarity. He saw it all at once. The truth. The shark was never meant to survive the transformation. The fusion of energy and biology was not random. It was guided. The reactor had not created the anomaly. It had responded to it. The energy signature they thought was from the core wasn't from the ship at all. It came from outside. Something had found them. Something vast enough to use the shark, to use them all as a bridge. He gasped, breaking the link. Reality slammed back like a wave. He fell to the deck, trembling, every nerve burning with phantom energy. Kethal grabbed him, pulling him upright. What happened? What did you see? Elias looked at him, eyes wide. It's not just evolving, it's becoming a signal. Kethal froze. A signal to what? Elias stared out the viewport. To whoever sent the energy here in the first place. Outside, the stars began to move. Not drift, move. Whole constellations rippling as if responding to an unseen current. Space itself seemed to breathe. Laura whispered, "They're answering." Kethal's glow dimmed. "Then we're out of time." He turned to the console, fingers trembling as he worked. "If I can overload the auxiliary cores, I can collapse the quantum field before the transmission completes, but it will destroy the ship." Elias stood, unsteady. "And kill it." Kethal didn't look up. "It's the only way to stop this from spreading." Elias hesitated. The heartbeat was louder now, faster, desperate. It wasn't an attack. It was panic. The creature was afraid of dying. It didn't understand what was happening any more than they did. Laura looked between them, her voice breaking. "Elias, what do we do?" He stared at the trembling light around them, the living hull of the ship. "If we destroy it now, we prove it right. That life can only survive through domination." Kethal turned sharply. "And if we don't, we risk the entire sector." Elias took a step closer to the console. "Or we show it what restraint means, what choice means." The professor hesitated. His glow flickered once, uncertain. Elias placed his hand on the console, feeling the faint pulse of the ship through the metal. He closed his eyes, letting his thoughts open, his heartbeat syncing with the rhythm around him. "Listen to me," he whispered. "You don't have to keep fighting. You don't have to survive by destroying. You can stop. You can rest." The hum faltered. The air grew still. For one suspended moment, everything held its breath. Then, gently, like a tide drawing back from shore, the energy began to subside. The lights dimmed, the pulse slowed. Kethal stared at the readings. "It's stabilizing." Laura's voice trembled. "It's listening." Elias opened his eyes. The stars beyond the viewport shimmered faintly, but no longer twisted or bent. Just stars again. Endless. Beautiful. For a long moment no one spoke. Then softly, almost imperceptibly, the creature's light flared once more, a final, slow pulse, not of pain, of gratitude. The hum faded. The metal underfoot cooled. Silence returned. Kethal exhaled shakily, colors flickering with disbelief. "It's gone." Elias shook his head. "No, it's changed form again. Maybe something we can't see." He looked out into the endless night, his reflection faint in the glass. For the first time since leaving Earth, he felt small in the right way, not diminished, but humbled. Laura whispered, "Do you think it understood you?" Elias's voice was quiet, distant. Maybe not the words, but it understood the feeling. Outside, one faint glimmer of blue light drifted through the dark, fading slowly until it was indistinguishable from the stars. The ship floated in silence. Systems flickered back to life one by one, hesitant, like lungs relearning how to breathe. Elias leaned against the railing, eyes still on the place where the light had vanished. "You were right, Kethal," he said softly. "It wasn't evolution. It was a message." Kethal turned to him. "From whom?" Elias smiled faintly. From life itself, reminding us what it costs to survive and what it means to choose not to. The stars outside shimmered once more, distant and eternal, and for the first time they didn't seem cold, but deep in the ship's heart, beneath metal and silence, something pulsed once, faint and steady, a heartbeat, waiting, listening, and somewhere far beyond the edge of known space, in a place where no light should exist, another heartbeat answered. The hum of the ship had changed. It was no longer a mechanical vibration through steel, but something softer, more like a sigh, the kind a living thing makes when it finally stops holding its breath. The bridge lay in half shadow. The emergency lights flickered like the remnants of a dying sunset, painting the faces of those who remained in shades of amber and gold. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence that asked you to listen, to the spaces between heartbeats, to what still lingered after everything else had gone. Elias stood by the viewport, watching the faint blue glimmer fade into the horizon of stars. It had been hours since the pulse stopped. The creature, the ship, the signal, whatever it was, had vanished. The instruments still registered nothing. No radiation, no quantum distortion, no trace of the impossible, only the emptiness of space, vast and indifferent. And yet, he could still feel it, that slow rhythm, that sense of presence, like an echo that refused to fade. Kethal moved quietly behind him, his glow reduced to a faint, steady amber. The reactor is stabilizing. We can reroute power to propulsion soon. We might even make it home. Elias didn't turn. Home, he repeated, the word tasting strange now. Do you think it still exists the same way it did when we left? The alien tilted his head, a shimmer of silver sliding through his translucent form. It rarely does. Time changes all homes, even if they never move. Laura sat on the floor near the console, legs folded beneath her, feathers dim with exhaustion. She was staring at her reflection in a shard of cracked glass, tracing the faint tremor that ran through her hand. "It's strange," she murmured. "We saw something that should never exist, that shouldn't be, and yet it doesn't feel like terror anymore. It feels..." She hesitated, searching for a word. "Holy." Kethel's glow deepened slightly, contemplative. "Perhaps the difference between monstrosity and divinity," he said, "is only how long we spend trying to understand it." Elias smiled faintly. Then we met both, in the same heartbeat. The ship creaked softly, a reminder that metal, unlike memory, doesn't heal. Panels were scorched, consoles cracked, the faint smell of ozone still hung in the air. But there was life again, the quiet hum of power returning, the flicker of working lights. Against all odds, they had survived. Elias turned at last, studying the others. Kethel stood by the navigation array, his movements slow, deliberate. Laura watched him with eyes full of something Elias hadn't seen since before the anomaly. Wonder. Not of fear or duty, but of simple, fragile awe. He took a slow breath. "We should send a report," he said, almost to himself. "But what do we even say? That a creature born in an ocean became a god in a machine?" Kethal let out a soft harmonic note, a sound between laughter and resignation. "If you tell the truth," he said, "no one will believe you. Then maybe it's not meant for belief." Elias stepped closer to the viewport, staring at the starfield. Maybe it's meant for memory. He thought of the shark, the way it had looked in that impossible ocean of thought, radiant and terrifying and beautiful. It wasn't just a predator. It was a story, a single thread in the endless weave of life, pulling forward through time because it didn't know how to stop. That was what life was in the end, the refusal to stop moving, even when there was nowhere left to go. Laura rose quietly and joined him at the glass. "Do you think it's still out there?" He nodded slowly. I think it always will be. Just not in a form we can recognize anymore. The stars ahead glowed faintly, their light bending through the remains of the ship's shielding field. For a moment, the distortion made them ripple like sunlight on water. Elias smiled faintly. Maybe it found its ocean again. They stood in silence for a long time, letting the ship drift. The vastness outside was neither friend nor foe. It was simply space, infinite and unmoved. But for the first time, Elias didn't feel small beneath it. He felt connected, as if somewhere, in the folds of the universe, something vast had paused for just a moment to remember him too. Cathal began inputting coordinates, the rhythmic tapping of his crystalline fingers soft and precise. If the currents are stable, we can resume course within the hour. The Federation will want an explanation. Lura chuckled softly. We'll tell them what they always tell us, that it was a data anomaly. Elias turned, the ghost of a grin on his face. That's not wrong. Cathal glanced at him, curious. You sound almost relieved. Elias shrugged lightly. Because for once, an anomaly reminded me what it means to be alive. Cathal studied him for a moment longer, then returned to his work. You humans, he said quietly, you endure what should break you. No wonder the stars fear you. Elias looked out again at the emptiness, at the soft, endless dark. The stars shouldn't fear us, he murmured. They should pity us. We're the only species cursed to see beauty in destruction. No one spoke after that. The ship drifted through the silence, its course steadying as navigation re-engaged. Fragments of shattered panels floated lazily past the viewport, glowing faintly in the dim light before fading into the black. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes, the kind of time that exists after catastrophe, when the mind hasn't yet remembered how to measure ordinary life. The crew worked quietly, repairing, recalibrating, recording. Each motion felt heavier, more deliberate, as though the weight of what they'd witnessed had pressed their souls into something denser, more aware. When Cathal finally declared the engines ready, the soft vibration of motion returned. The ship turned slowly toward the distant line of familiar constellations, toward home. As the engines warmed, a faint tremor rippled through the deck. At first, Elias thought it was a system fluctuation, but then it came again, slow and rhythmic. A heartbeat. He looked down, then at the others. Lura's feathers flared with quiet light. Cathal's glow flickered in recognition. None of them spoke. They just listened. The pulse was soft, almost gentle, like a whisper left behind. It wasn't the creature. It wasn't the ship. It was something else. A resonance carried in the field. A memory embedded in the very fabric of the space they'd altered. Lura smiled faintly. It left a part of itself behind. Elias nodded. Or maybe it left a part of us behind. The pulse faded, leaving only silence again. But the silence was different now. Warmer, deeper, as if the void itself had learned to breathe. Cathal looked up, his eyes reflecting the faint starlight. Do you think it will happen again? Elias considered. Maybe it already is. Maybe everything alive is just another version of the same story. Life reaching, adapting, trying to understand what it means to exist. He turned his gaze back to the stars. Maybe that's what the universe is made of, not matter or energy, but memory, the echo of everything that's ever tried to survive. Lura's voice was quiet. Then the shark wasn't a monster. Elias shook his head. No, just the oldest part of us, finally remembering what it means to stop fighting. They stood there together as the ship glided forward. The stars ahead shimmered, distant and endless. Somewhere out there, a faint blue light might still drift between galaxies, carrying within it the echo of a heartbeat, that had once belonged to a creature from a forgotten sea. And perhaps somewhere else, something larger was listening, curious, cautious, waiting for the next story to unfold. Elias closed his eyes. He could still feel the pulse, faint but constant. A rhythm not of fear, but of connection. The reminder that even in a universe that could swallow entire worlds, life, any life, had a voice. He whispered, "Maybe that's what makes us dangerous to them, not our weapons or our will, but our ability to care for something we don't yet understand." The stars stretched before him, eternal and unknowable. Somewhere in their light he imagined he saw the curve of a fin, the shimmer of something moving through the void, graceful and unafraid. And in that moment he realized that the question had never been whether the universe feared humanity, but whether it could ever learn to love the parts of itself that still did. The engines hummed softly, steady and alive. The ship turned toward home. Behind them, the stars rippled once, just a flicker like the surface of a distant sea catching the light. Then, silence. And in that silence, the faintest echo of a heartbeat lingered, ancient, patient, eternal, carried onward through the infinite dark, like a promise whispered between one form of life and the next. Because maybe, in the end, that was all any of it ever was. Not conquest, not survival. Just the universe learning, again and again, how to remember itself.